probably a good segue because I've got lots of questions about Renovation Sells, but when I talk to people, the thing that I really get interested about is almost like the 2 or 3 steps back, the few stories before you even started the business, and sort of what led you there. So now you're obviously based in Chicago. Did you grow up in Chicago land area?
I did not. No, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
And then went to school at Miami of Ohio. And then right when I graduated, I came out to Chicago. And so that was in 2002. So I guess I've been here now for close to 23 years.
Okay. And was it just a job that led you here? Was it just opportunities for a job? How did you land here? What was the story behind that?
No, I mean, it's the funny story is, because I was from the East Coast and went to school in the Midwest, I was, had a good group of college friends. And frankly, I asked my best friend at the time, I just said, "Hey man, where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to Chicago." And I said, "Well, I've never been there, but it sounds like a fun place. I'll go there."
Mm-hmm.
And so I moved to Chicago with my very good friend, who I was roommates with in college. And the first time that I ever saw Chicago was in the U-Haul truck coming over like the 94 bridge out of Gary. And so I'd never been here, and I moved here and landed right in Wrigleyville. And the funnier story about that is I remember telling my dad, he goes, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I think I'm going to move to Chicago." And he's like, "Do you have a job?" And I said, "No, I don't have a job, but it's the 3rd biggest city in the country. I'll find one."
Yeah.
And he was like, "I don't understand. Why are you moving there if you don't have a job?" But that was how I landed here in Chicago. No job, just followed friends out here.
Yeah. And where'd you live in Wrigleyville?
I lived right by the stadium, so Addison and Wilton Avenue.
Okay.
And so, it was close enough to the stadium that on days when they were playing, if you had the windows open, you could hear when they hit a home run. Yeah. And TV was delayed, so like you knew that they hit a home run because you could hear the cheers. Yep. And then you would see it on TV a couple seconds later.
Yeah. No, I know it well. It's funny. I'm a huge White Sox fan. I grew up in Chicago. But I right out of school, my story is very similar. Moved to same thing. Moved to Wrigleyville with college roommates, and we lived. Right. We were at Grace, and it's been enough years now. I don't remember. I think it was Grace and Magnolia, so it's like 2 blocks. And same thing. We were just watching on TV, and there would be that little delay, so you knew when a home run was coming because you heard it a few seconds before you saw it on TV. Those were some crazy years. So where did how did that job search go? The real kind of I imagine there was probably some urgency kind of moving and finding something quick, right?
But I mean, when you're, young and dumb and right out of college, it doesn't matter as much, right? So my first job out of school, I actually hauled beer up to the rooftop decks on the rooftop decks of the 3-unit buildings outside of the field. And so that was my very first job, was kind of working those rooftop decks that are on the outside of Wrigley. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up waiting tables that summer at a place that's no longer there called Heaven on 7, Cajun food, but right on Clark Street.
Okay. And so no, I know that. I know that place also. I used to.
You know that place also?
I used to go. I used to go to the one downtown quite a bit.
Right.
The one, and I think there was even 2 downtown. But so you had a couple different jobs really early on. What was the now? Obviously, at some point you got into the contracting work, general contracting. Was that how quickly did some of that work come about?
Yeah, no, I mean, and so, that was the first summer, right when I moved here. And then I had a quick stint at a headhunting firm where we, were looking, it was IT recruiting. Okay. And I had to wear a suit and a tie downtown. I took the train, the red line downtown to the middle of LaSalle, 10 South LaSalle. So dark down there, still is, even during the daylight. But we were, had to make like 100 cold calls a day. Yeah. And that was at the time right around when the kind of .com bubble was bursting. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to do IT recruiting and calling people and seeing if they were looking for jobs or if they had job openings. Yeah. But everybody was looking for a job and there was no job openings. Yeah. And so that was really hard. That was like boiler room style.
Yeah.
I walked in and they would hand me a phone. I sat next to my boss and she would hand me a list and say, dial.
Yeah.
And that's like literally what I did all day.
Yeah.
And so that got old pretty quick. I did that for about 6 months, but that was one of those jobs where like every morning you just dreaded going into work.
Yeah. I was going to ask you how much you hated it. I mean, maybe there are some people that really like that, like the hunt. And, I guess if you're really, really good at it, there's some upside, but my first job technically is not, listed on my resume or anything. My first job was in a call center, recruiting people to enroll in an online university. And, that what was told to me is that like, oh, everybody you're talking to, requested a call and they're interested. And this is like a very warm lead and you're not cold calling. And yet every single person I talk to is like, how did you get my information? Stop calling me. So that job only lasted maybe 6 weeks for me. So you made it a little longer than I did.
I made it a little longer. And, it's funny, some of those jobs, and then, a lot of skill, like I'm not afraid of the phone. And, so as much as that, I didn't like it, I think it gave me a very valuable skill that I use today. I will very much pick up the phone and call anybody. Not that I make a ton of cold calls, but like, I'm not scared to dial a number.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people are, just because of the unknown on the other side. And so, that was a positive that came from that. And then from there, I worked about 5 years for a company called C.H. Robinson. So it's a Fortune 500 logistics company. They have a big presence and pull from a lot of the big Midwest schools here. And so, a lot of young, early to mid 20s college kids or just out of college that work there. And that was a lot of fun. And I did pretty well at that, except it was inside sales. And it was, again, a lot of on the phone. I had 2 phones. I had 2 computers. We were constantly, it was like brokering freight. And so, that was a good job. And I liked it and had a lot of friends over there. But I just, you said, how did I get into construction and real estate? I realized, late in kind of 2007, after a couple of years over there, I just was built to be my own boss. I wasn't meant to work for other people. And, I vividly remember I just had a thing with, why do I have to tell my boss if I wanted to take a day off, if I worked hard? And it's not that I like took all these days off. It was just more like a moral issue with me. Like, it's not up to anybody else. Like, it should be up to me if I want to take a day off.
Yeah.
And so
now, did you realize it at the time that was maybe the beginning of that kind of entrepreneurial bug, or was it more that you were just feeling like something wasn't quite the right fit? Because I always kind of had that similar thing, like every job I had where I'd be afraid to leave a few minutes, early. Like if I'm dipping out of the office because there's nothing going on at 4:00 and yet I'm technically supposed to be there till 4:30, that was the thing that I felt like, a little uncomfortable about. And I was like, I shouldn't feel uncomfortable about this. And then I started, that's what kind of got me to realize that entrepreneurial bug, that like, hey, there's another path here that I know people are taking. Like how much of that were you feeling at the time?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was just, I'm a self-starter. I'm someone that, believes in myself, and I have a lot of ideas. And, I think a lot of it was, some of that just reporting in and up to somebody else, just didn't sit well with me, and for better or worse, I like to do things the way I like to do things, and as long as I get it done, I didn't like to conform to other people's processes and standards. But I think that's very, some of the traits of most of us entrepreneurs that want to work for ourselves. There's just things that, we can thrive in environments that we do work for others, but at the same token, we're never truly happy working for other people because it's not our way and it's not, how we want to do it.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was more of it, asking for time off or being on time or doing this was just kind of some of the ancillary stuff that, you notice more, but deep down it was always inside of me. But I don't think I really realized it until maybe mid to late 20s at that time that like I need to work for myself.
Yeah. Did you have anybody in your life that you were kind of exposed to that was already doing it, or that had like that you could see, somebody that kind of figured it out, or there was a little bit of a playbook? I mean, I was very lucky. My dad was like an insurance guy his whole life. He was an actuary. He had a very corporate 9-to-5 job. But when I was very young, he quit his job and just became a consultant and just kind of worked from home. And that was very weird at the time, like to be in the insurance space, but you're just working in your basement. So I saw that growing up, and I was exposed to it. And I had some other friends and family who were kind of doing it as well. So I would say that I was lucky because I kind of saw some other people doing it. Did you have that at all, or were you kind of blazing your own trail?
I did. I was kind of blazing my own trail, and still to this day do. My dad was a executive, or ran medical nonprofits, and so I definitely learned and picked up some of the CEO traits. He was the CEO. He was the CEO of a non-for-profit global medical organization, which is very different than corporate organization. But there was a lot of chat and talk around, leadership and employment and things like that around the dinner table. But he was also still a very much, corporate soldier, in that respect, where, he had to go to work every day, 9 to 5, and travel, and, had a board of directors, and, he wasn't the founder. He was just a for-hire CEO that happened to be in this kind of very niche non-for-profit medical space that he ran companies in, but he did that for a long time. And so I learned that from him. So I think a lot of the kind of CEO traits I learned from him, but as far as entrepreneurship and, all the other sides of the business in terms of creation and, how do you, do bookkeeping and all the things that young entrepreneurs and any entrepreneur has to figure out, that stuff I had to learn on the fly.
Yeah.
And there was no one that was really teaching me. And frankly, to this day, everything I've learned, I've most likely learned it because I've just made the mistake in some fashion.
Yeah.
And I've learned from it, and I've just figured it out over the years and years and years I've been doing it.
Yep. Yeah, I think, and maybe a little bit of that comes with some of your early jobs of like doing the cold calling and getting used to rejection and figuring out, well, that didn't work. I'm going to figure out something really quickly that does work and not worry about it too much and move forward. And I mean, that's a lot of the early years of entrepreneurship, just figuring stuff out and not getting too hard on yourself, but also pushing yourself too. I mean, it's a crazy ride, those early years for sure, at least.
Well, it's always a crazy ride. And I don't know, any entrepreneur and people that own businesses. I mean, if it's not one thing, it's the next. And when you grow, you have bigger problems, and so those kind of, times you always think, and you go in these lulls, right? Like it's kind of like waves, right? They come in waves. You have these days that are great. You have these days that are tough.
Yeah.
You have all different types. And so, I don't think that ever subsides, but, I really have this motto and something that we say, fail forward. And so what that means is just, look, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Just keep going forward. As you fail, get up and keep going. And again, I think that anybody that started and run a business very much understands that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also really always interested when I talk to founders about the, especially when it's the first kind of business that you're starting, or taking the leap kind of for the first time, that moment. And I feel like there usually is a moment when you kind of make that decision and go, all right, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to do it. Rarely, I mean, it probably happens where it is kind of a slow thing that like you might blink and go, oh my gosh, I'm kind of doing my own thing. And maybe I wasn't planning on it, but here I am. But did you have a moment where, you were working in the, construction and real estate space, and you just was it a light bulb moment? Take me through that process or that time in your career?
Well, I think it goes in stages, Dan. And I say that is, like the first moment was when I was still working at C.H. Robinson. And this was in November of, 2007-ish. And I, was kind of made the decision that, okay, it's time for me to leave, and I'm going to get into the real estate and construction field. And so, those moments are always exciting when you finally come to like that path forward, because I think people, get antsy and they get complacent and feel uncomfortable sometimes when you're sitting in, stagnation, or where you're not moving, right? Like it just feels stuck. Everything just feels the same. There's no movement forward and you're not sure what your path forward is. And so, determining that moment in late 2007 was definitely exciting and something that I was ready for. Now I left in the very beginning part of 2008. I immediately got licensed as a realtor. I still carry that license today. And then on the general contracting front, got licensed on that side. And then I went and worked for a small builder developer for about 4 years. And so my first entry, but it was like, commission only. There was no stipend. There was no nothing. So I was essentially on my own, but I did have someone at least that had, understood and knew remodeling.
Yeah.
And so I worked for him for the first 4 years of my career, learning kind of real estate construction and remodeling.
Yeah. And was that the person that you kind of knew in that space that kind of brought you in, or what was what kind of led you there? Because from the outside, it seems like kind of like a hard left turn,
Yeah, no, it was a hard left turn. Like it was definitely something completely different. I mean, I was switching careers at that time. I had owned I'd owned a one bedroom or owned a one bedroom condo at the time in Old Town. I needed to have it remodeled, frankly.
Yeah.
And he remodeled my one bedroom condo.
Okay.
I got to know him, and he was just a one-off guy, and he was trying to grow his business. And I said, hey, what if I come and do kind of sales and project management for you? Are you looking for someone like that? So that's how I left. I mean, he was the catalyst to, and how I saw, I like the process. I like the design side. I like the construction. I just liked that for whatever reason. So I went and worked with him from like 2008 to 2012. And so now those were really hard years in real estate. I got into residential real estate, obviously at the start of the 2008 real estate crisis.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. That must have been a weird time to get started.
Well, I don't think I didn't know any different. Right. And I remember someone at my CH Robinson, one of the managers that I had known, I told him what I was doing, and he said, well, you better put your helmet on. And at the time I didn't know, I had no idea what that meant. I was like, yeah, whatever. Put my helmet on. But he obviously understood what was about to happen. He was older, and, we ran into a buzzsaw of a real estate market. And so, that's when I started my career. So it wasn't easy for the first 2 years. I think fortunately at that time, I didn't have much life overhead. And what I mean by that is, I owned a one bedroom condo in Old Town, that probably cost $250,000. It cost me $1,500 a month or whatever it was. Sure. I didn't have a car. My expenses were low. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids, so it was definitely the time that if I was going to take that risk, it was the right time to do so. Right. So, it worked out obviously in the end, but, sometimes it's harder as you get older and you have more of those life overhead that gets in the way. It becomes harder to leave the corporate jobs and the steady paycheck and the benefits and the 401k matching and all that stuff. Yeah. It's hard to do.
Yeah. So around that time, it was, I think you said it was like 2008 to 12 that you were kind of working, in this new industry, figuring out, like, obviously there was a lot of craziness happening, but it was all new to you. So you were kind of learning the industry. At what point did the idea for Renovation Sells come about? And actually, what was some of the stuff that led up to that? Like you obviously had a little bit of the, that entrepreneurial bug in you somewhere. So when did those two kind of things collide?
That comes later. I mean, that doesn't come. We didn't create Renovation Sells until 2018. So, really the kind of the next phase of that story is that, I worked with him from 2008 to 12. I just sold kitchens and baths. I'd always figured that realtors were the ones that would connect me to their clients. And so my kind of target was always to go after the real estate agents. And that's how I got the work. And so, again, did a whole bunch of projects, learned a lot over those 4 years. And then as we were coming out of that, the real estate crisis, it kind of started to end in 10, but really in 12, when things started to turn around, is when I said, all right, it's really time for me to go off on my own. And so, I remember that conversation with him. I can remember where I was standing and all that stuff on that street corner down in the Gold Coast, and said, it's time for me. I got to go open up my own shop.
Yeah.
And so that is when, I really went off on my own. In 2012, opened up my first company, which was called MV Construction and Development. I bought my first multifamily building, fixed up a 4-unit building in Wicker Park. At that time, those building values were pretty depressed. You could get a 4-unit building for $500,000, which is unheard of these days. And so, bought that building, fixed it all up, with my own guys and crews, and lived in one of the units and lived rent free for a little while. And so, I that was my kind of entry point, started teaching and learning, real estate investment, started flipping houses. And then, we really had this for-hire construction business that, just like when I worked for that gentleman, but people would call us up and we would remodel their kitchen baths or homes. We just did it under, my own flag. And so I had met my then or now still partner and project manager, John. That's when we met in 2012, and him and I formed a partnership. And I basically said, look, I'll go get the work. I'll run the business. You go run the crews. And that's how we work. And to this day, that's how we've worked for the past, 13 years. And so that was the first step into my true entrepreneurship by myself. We did bigger and bigger projects over the years. I bought some more multifamily buildings, flipped houses. So we were kind of doing all three. And then come around maybe 2015 or 16, we ended up kind of partnering with a pretty well-known designer here in Chicago. And we became the construction arm, or did a lot of her construction work, where she would go get the projects, do the design, and then we would do the execution. And so that's how we got into high-end residential and doing kind of high design. And we learned a lot about design and, high-end construction. And so we worked for her for a couple of years. And, but this goes, it's, every couple of years, you always reevaluate in any business. You're constantly thinking and rethinking and what direction, and you're always pivoting. And, after a while, some of those high-end design projects that were really beautiful, they were in magazines, it was fatiguing to do some of that type of work.
Yeah.
The projects would last a year. We had plans and permits, inspections, high net worth clients that were very demanding. Design was very, particular and precise. And we kind of just realized that, we didn't want to do that type of work anymore.
Yeah.
And so, how did we get to Renovation Sells? It was after, 5 years of working for myself under my own flag, but doing this higher end construction, we just realized that it wasn't what we wanted to do. And so we looked back at a lot of the projects and we're thinking like, hey, what's our next step? We really like construction. We really like real estate. We really like design, but we didn't like a lot of the things that we were doing. Yeah. And so we were rethinking our overall model, and we landed on, over the years, real estate agents had always brought us, these quick jobs, paint the cabinets or change the counters. And we didn't always like to take them. We thought they were too small for us. But the aha moment was, we kind of looked back and looked at, we made pretty good money on it. There wasn't a whole bunch of client interaction. We still got to do design. We still got to do construction. And we realized that, everybody wants to be bigger. Bigger isn't always better. If we got really good at doing smaller, then our competition wouldn't be as heavy, because the people that we were competing against, were individuals out of their truck. They weren't using software. They were doing the old way of construction that everybody knows. It's 20 years dated. It's just not up to speed the way that people construct. And so that was how we got to Renovation Sells. It was, how do we do all the things we like about construction? The realtors had a need for it, and then eliminating all the things that we didn't like about construction. Yeah. And so we flipped our model in 2018 and became Renovation Sells.
And I'm curious, learning a little bit more about, the origin of the business. Was it that you were doing lots of work with realtors, and because that's a great way to, find clients and, probably find many clients by connecting with a bunch of really great realtors, and then you were getting a lot of the kind of the business through them? Or was it kind of the other way around where you said, hey, this is the work we want to do. How do we go find those people? Well, the answer to that is, that's maybe through the realtors. Or was it kind of like a little bit of both?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was, we had been contacted over the years from realtors that, wanted us to do this type of work. But we didn't know or think that it was an actual thing. And then I think it was, just understanding that no one else was doing this type of remodeling. Yeah. And so, people in business often say, find your niche. And it sounds so simple, but how do you find your niche? It took me 10 years to find my niche. Yeah. I didn't know where we stood or what was our niche, but it seemed natural at the time. And so a lot of the clients that we worked with, realtors or clients, weren't our clients in Renovation Sells. And so we did have to go after and find a lot of new realtors and connections. And that's a constant. That never stops. I think that's any business. We're always trying to find new connections and make, new sales inroads. And so it was a little bit of both. It was some past people that we knew, but then also knowing that, okay, now we really had to attack this from a different angle. Yeah.
Yeah. Because a lot of times it's multiple roads that all kind of take you to the same destination, which is that idea of finding a niche, because whether it's the business and like the nuts and bolts of what you do and who you do it for, or for me, I'm a little bit downstream of that. And, a lot of clients I help with are, positioning and messaging and branding and figuring out, how you talk about your business. And the more specific you can be about what you do and who you do it for, the more likely it is you're going to connect with those people, the more likely you're going to be found. I mean, there's a long list of just really great reasons why, if you have a niche and you can really commit to it and be like really disciplined. I think a lot of people think, the more I do that, the more I, eliminate other opportunities because I might want to do something over here, or I might want to do something over there. And because I've, jumped on this niche, now I won't be able to do that. And I found, at least, like, there are still many, you still get all those other opportunities, but it just really helps you grow. And it sounds like maybe that's, when you guys got started, being that you didn't have a ton of competition of people who were really putting some attention on that niche, it sounded like that was a pretty good starting point. I mean, how much success did you guys have right away with people having that light bulb moment when you start to talk about what you do and they go, oh, wow, that's exactly, like, I get the problem you're solving and I get who you do it for. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do right out the gate.
Yeah. Look, we always had, and still to this day, we always have people that really like the idea. The idea of prepping a house for sale to make it pretty, to sell it faster for more money is really a no-brainer. And you get a lot of people that say, why didn't I think of that? And so, as far as like that idea resonating, it resonates, as much today, if not more, than it did back then. I think back then it was very much more of a novelty, just because there wasn't a lot of companies that were doing it. The real estate brokerage houses weren't talking about it. It was something that was very much needed and made a lot of sense, but wasn't anywhere spoken about. Today, that's changed. There's a couple companies that do this national, including ourselves, the big brokerage houses, from Zillow to Realtor.com to Compass to Ad Properties and Baird and Warner. I mean, it's something that's discussed often amongst all these entities. Getting your house ready for sale, sell it faster for more money just makes sense. But the challenge becomes is just because you have a great idea and people validate your idea, year one of any business, we needed a website, we needed marketing, we needed flyers, we needed a sales strategy, we needed a software system, we needed everything. We had a design process, you need everything.
Yeah.
And so year one was definitely a learning year. We didn't explode. We had a good year, something that validated that we were on the right path. And, anytime you transition, there's always a learning curve. You always have to take sometimes, one step back to take two steps forward.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely the year where we took a step back, had to retool everything, understand, sometimes you even have to, what is my message? How do I pitch that message?
Yeah.
And create, a lot of people are entrepreneurs, but not everybody are founders. And that's meaning, the creation aspect of really standing up a business from the start to the finish, EIN numbers and tax IDs and accounting and systems and software and marketing and websites and logos. Like, you just don't think about people, I want to create something, but the creation is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you're doing a lot of creating. You're not doing a lot of revenue generating activities.
Yeah. Do you remember some of the bigger, like, specific challenges that just kind of felt the most daunting? Like, were there moments that you can think back on? I'm sure there are.
I mean, everything's a challenge. And I say that because it starts with, the challenge of the day is, a website, a .com name. What are we going to name our company? What's our logo going to be? Who's going to create our logo? How are we going to fund it? How are we going to get marketing? So every day in starting something, I think even for the first 5 years, really, and that's why most companies don't make it past 5 years, is a challenge in some respect to you're creating the wheel, and everything is a challenge, right? And so, and at some point, companies get into the operational phase, and that's where it's established, everything's set, you've got kind of everything you need, and now it's operating and optimizing. But, year one was filled with challenges. My day is still, as the founder and CEO of our franchise company, and it's still filled with challenges. And so, but I know people that run, $100 million companies, and every day they have challenges. So it's a constant challenge. You're never complacent. And again, I said this earlier, if it's not one thing, it's the next.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Let me get a water real quick.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah. I like to kind of compare starting a business with, like, having kids sometimes. Like, when you start, oh my gosh, like, you're not sleeping. The challenges are like, you don't know what you're doing. And then I think everybody, when they don't have kids, and I was guilty of this, you kind of think, once they're out of that infant stage, it gets easier. And when they're in elementary school, it gets easier, or middle school, you don't have to do, by high school, the challenges are just different. You never know what you're doing, and you're always figuring it out. And it's extremely rewarding, obviously, otherwise, people wouldn't do it, but it's definitely not easy, but the challenge is just different problems on a different day, and it never goes away. So I think you have to really love that the journey more than anything, not to be too cliche, compared to like what the destination is.
It is, but that takes time to realize, because, when you're in the moment, you're trying to develop and create, and you're in the thick of things, you don't always think, this is great because I love the journey. It's a grind. And when you look back, you realize things have happened for a reason that have made you better for today. And that is the journey, right? And that's why people say it's the journey, not the destination. But any founder and entrepreneur definitely has a destination in mind, or they would not do this.
Yeah.
Right. They're not, people don't quit their job because they're, oh, I want to go on this great journey. No, they quit their job because they put a flag at the top of the mountain and say, I've got to reach that flag.
Yeah.
But what I think we all do as entrepreneurs is we create false peaks, meaning we get to where we finally think we want to get to. And then we're like, no, I'm not sure I like this. And then you just continue to move that goalpost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just think that's, the destination is where we set out for, but the journey is what you end up with when you look back at all the experience, because they can't take that away. And a lot of what we do, it cannot be taught. It has to be learned.
Yeah.
It just has to be learned. But one thing that you had said, because I think this is I use this analogy a lot, is a business, and owning a business is very much like raising a child. And businesses act almost identical to how children act at different ages. When they're 0 to 1, every second of every day, you're constantly looking at it, you're feeding it, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're doing something. And then as they grow and they get a little older, but even in, years 2 and 3 and 4, the toddler phase, the businesses will scream at you. Like, they'll just have meltdowns for no reason sometimes, and you don't understand why.
Yeah.
And you get this these are the growing pains, and you get this toddler phase where you still have to feed it and tie its shoes and everything. And sometimes it just yells at you. And then as they develop, it gets a little bit more stable, just like kids do, when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, they still have challenges, but they can tie their shoes, they can get their own food, they can put their clothes on. So you're not constantly in a fire drill moment. You're more in a maintaining, okay, let's maintain and mold, but I've always thought that every business that I've ever started or run acts almost identical to the kind of stages that a child does.
Yeah.
From infancy up through the years. It just does.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my business is only a few years more older than that. So they're actually quite similar. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but so obviously, my background is marketing, branding, marketing strategy. In those first, say handful of years, do you remember moments where some of the marketing was starting to click, or the branding, when you start to think about how the heck do we position Renovation Sells in a way that's like crystal clear, that's going to connect with the right people? We don't want to kind of be too many things for too many people. Like, do you remember a moment when stuff started to click, or even a story of like a marketing initiative that just worked really well, that kind of maybe sent you guys down the path that was a good one to go down?
Well, I think it starts at even inception, coming up with the name of Renovation Sells.
Yeah.
And, I remember talking with my wife, who's a partner in our franchise business with me, and us creating Renovation Sells. We were trying to figure out what it was. Well, we renovate to sell, Renovation Sells, and they still had a .com, at that time. So we got renovationsells.com. Don't know if that matters as much anymore, but that's how we landed on the name. It just was very descriptive. And to this day, people say that's exactly what you all do. We renovate homes to sell them. So Renovation Sells. The marketing, from a marketing front, that's an ever evolving. We're kind of set now, but that's something that has ever evolved over the past 6 years, from different iterations of a logo to, where we stand today, which is the logo on my hat. This is the third version of where we've been. And so it's been trial and error, and the way that we sell, and selling to real estate agents specifically, isn't necessarily the same way you may sell to the homeowner. And so a lot of what we've done and tried has really been, trial and error, things that worked, things that didn't work. But I do realize, and we realized this somewhat early on, that it's a relationship business, meaning, you have to be in front of face-to-face these realtors. That's how it gets done.
Yeah.
No marketing campaigns, no social media, no Instagram, no Google ads, that stuff doesn't work. The only thing that works is you have to be at events next to the people, get to know them, and that's how they begin to trust you and give you opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's not one strategy. I mean, we did, though, from, when we started in 2018, that was the first kind of setup year. And then the second year, we really did explode. 2019 we quadrupled our business. And then, that was the aha moment for us. That was like, this will really work, not just in Chicago, but how do we scale this up?
Mm-hmm.
That's when we decided to get into the franchising business.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause a lot of my career, I've worked with B2B companies and never just like a simple, consumer brand. I've definitely worked with them, but most of them are kind of complex. They're industries that have lots of different audiences and lots of different products. And, it's never as simple as like you're marketing from A to B. So, and the one thing I was always interested in is when companies had, if it was a B2B play and it was B2B marketing, but at some point you needed to like figure out the marketing for, your client to market to their clients. And so that's like sort of like the chain of sort of co-marketing. So in your guys' case, I imagine at some point, maybe you did a little bit of, obviously marketing to realtors to say, hey, listen, like this is a great thing that you could offer your clients, and here's how it all works. And, here's how you can explain it. But then at some point, were you also kind of helping them and arming them to go and do some of that marketing? I guess it's not really marketing, but it's sort of that blend of marketing and sales, but like sort of explaining to their clients how it works. I mean, how involved were you in that? Or was it just really simple where you just said, hey, listen, this is what we can offer you, and it kind of works itself out?
Yeah, it wasn't, arming the agents per se. I think one of the bigger moments that we had was that gave us not, validation is that everybody's familiar with Compass, the real estate agency. Yep. Compass in 2018-19 came out with a concierge product, and their Compass concierge product was a product that the Compass corporate operation would give money to the real estate agents' clients who were listing homes in order to update those homes to sell them faster and for more money. And so just as that program was rolling out, we became the preferred vendor in Chicago for that Compass concierge. And so that was a big step of validation in how we got in front of a lot of good agents, was through the corporate. And this is the evolution of my business. From when we started, it was a novelty, and then the progression to it becoming more mainstream in terms of, yes, you should prep your house before you list it for sale, just because it makes sense. And so we latched on to that type of program, and then we're pushed out through corporate into the different agents, and then we had gotten to know at properties along the way and the ownership over there, and they were interested in this model. And so making some inroads at the corporate level and getting that validation that we were able to then use at the individual agent level was really how we entered in to this market. And look, at that time, it was still kind of grassroots. We didn't have a big team. We weren't doing webinars. I don't think Zoom was a thing like it is now, because Zoom, was probably around, but wasn't something that was utilized the way that it is, where you give webinars and teach people how to do it. Yeah. And so, so our inroads were really through the corporate organizations that were adopting this method, and we were the ones that were the executors of that method. Yeah. And because you guys had a pretty small team, I'm guessing there was no real desire to try to go and figure out how do you market this more broadly, like directly to to homeowners, because maybe you did a little bit of that, but I'm guessing that would have been just a huge undertaking, and maybe not even that much upside, because the more direct route, I'm guessing, was maybe through the partnerships and realtors, right? Well, yes, and this gets into the nuances of construction sales. Yeah. Most construction sales, even to this day, I say most, not all, it's a referral business. Yeah. It's not something that most people don't Google, Chicago painter. Most people ask their friend, they ask the realtor, they ask their community, they ask someone at church, their gym, whoever it may be, someone that they're connected with. Hey, I remember you doing a project. Who did you use? And that's how construction and names are transferred.
Yeah.
And so, going down those kind of traditional paths wasn't the way that we saw this, that we just saw this going. And so, those paths weren't taken, and it was really agent by agent and getting that referral base.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask too, you mentioned a couple times the franchise component of the business today. And it sounds like, from hearing your story, there are all these sort of pivotal moments. Is when you first kind of got into, construction real estate, then you decided to go out on your own, then you decided to sort of brand everything into Renovation Sells. And I'm guessing the next really big kind of decision was to go pursue this franchise model. How did that come about?
Yeah. So this is, September of 2019. So we were in a year and a half. 19 was a great year, our second year in business. And we just really were catching our stride in terms of what we were doing here in Chicago. We thought, for the most part, that we were the only ones that were doing this pre-sale renovation. We were the only ones doing it in Chicago. There was no one else that was doing prepping houses for sale that was specifically focusing on that. Now, people were doing it, one-offs, like we had been doing it in 2012, because agents would say, hey, can you do this with their contractors? But no one had it branded the way that we did. And so in September of 2019, one of the other national companies that do this came to town and, made a big splash. They were backed up by a whole bunch of private equity money. They were starting to expand fairly rapidly. And at that time in 2019, maybe they had 6 or 7 locations, but they were opening up shop in Chicago. And so, number one, we got scared because we just, oh my God, here comes this big behemoth that has all this money, that's got a lot more people, tech and resources than we do. It was just a couple of us. How are we going to compete against it? But as we started to get, dig into their model a little bit more and realize that this type of movement in terms of prepping houses for sale was kind of taking hold all over, that's when we decided, hey, let's scale this, because we know there's another company that's moving across the country. They did not have it via a franchise model. They had it via a project management model where it was run and operated out of a different state. And then they hired project managers in their local areas that they were expanding to. They just had a really good marketing arm that was generating leads. And so we realized that, number one, that it kind of validated what we were doing. The brokerage houses were adopting it. There was a bigger company that was starting to move and expand. And we realized that, look, we also can expand, but we thought that the other company had a flawed model in terms of, if you're going to be in someone's home, it's very difficult to run a multi-state construction operation with project management. You just don't get that level of service that you need. And to this day, they still operate, but they're downsizing, and they have pretty bad reviews because of that project management side. People like, who's watching my project, who's executing. And so, long story short, we decided that we can scale. The best way to do that was via the franchise model. Why the franchise model? The franchise model is an ownership model, meaning when you bring in new franchisees, they own the rights to a particular location, but they treat that area in their territory like I do, like an owner of their location. And inherently, owners give better service than project managers when someone's owned and local and in the community. And so that's how we decided to scale via the franchise model, because we realized that we could scale fast, with this ownership model. And then we were a little bit more nimble with where we went, because if a franchisee decided to open up in, any state or any city, we could immediately open up shop pretty quickly. Yeah. It wasn't like we were picking off cities, based off population or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I feel like from the outside, it seems like you guys grew really, really fast from that franchise model. How quickly did it grow, and did that come with, well, I'm sure, a whole bunch of new challenges, right? Of how to do that, how to make sure that the people you're bringing on are going to be good, stewards of the brand, and going to run the business like you do. I mean, that's like every franchise. That's kind of the goal. But how did that process go for you guys in the beginning?
Right. Well, I mean, it's, we decided to franchise in late 2019. Once we made the decision, it was right around Thanksgiving. We started sending emails and connecting with people in the industry, and we had signed up with a consultant and an attorney in January of 2020. And so it wasn't much long after that, we decided to go down the path, and that we did it. And I think that's, for people out there that are listening and thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, I think something, a great quality, but at the same time of mine, sometimes it's a detriment, is, I just go. If you have an idea, don't overthink it. Just start to somehow put it in place. And so obviously we did our research. It took us 2 months, but in the grand scheme of things, we weren't thinking about this for years. We came up with the idea. 2 months later, we had started down the path of franchising. And so, but then that came with a whole set of new challenges, right? And so now we're starting a whole new business, because a franchise business is very different than a construction business, very different. And so learning and getting that up and running, but it took us 18 months to get the whole franchise operation up and running. And what I mean by that is, we have franchise disclosure documents called FDDs and franchise agreements, which are essentially operating agreements between ourselves and our franchisees, and manuals and all the steps and stages and marketing that needed to happen in order to sell your business.
Yeah.
And that took us 18 months. And so we started in January 2020. When the pandemic hit, everything went haywire, obviously, but we were in the early stages of getting this business up and running. And, we didn't sell our first locations until September of 21. And so it took a while to get it stood up and going.
Yeah. And once you guys were kind of up and running, I know from limited sort of exposure to companies that kind of jump into the franchise model, some of the challenges are usually like, okay, do you have, the franchises doing their own marketing? I mean, a lot of times you're training them on like a process, and, getting them ready to go and start, networking, and basically taking all the things that you've learned over the years, package that up. So that's like a big benefit to them. It's like that, they have the benefit of being backed by usually like a really great process, a really great brand. But how much of that were you sort of handing off to them, and how much did you sort of let them own in terms of putting their own, probably not their own process, but marketing or networking or things like that?
Right. Well, franchising is still very entrepreneurial. And so, people who are coming into this and wanting to be franchisees and run the system still have that entrepreneurial gene in them, or they wouldn't be doing this. Yeah. Because if they didn't. And so, franchising is really about putting together a playbook, putting together a set of kind of guardrails in terms of operations and procedures. And that's what we had to do in the first 18 months. But what I will say is, just like any business, as you grow, you evolve. And so the way our system sits and looks almost 5 years later looks very different than when it looked back in September of 21, when we sold our first locations. Yeah. And so, and that's just because we've had to adapt. We've listened to our franchisees. We've had to, there's always a new set of challenges, and how do you come up with whatever the solve is for the day to make you better. Yeah. And so again, the system, for our first couple people, but it was pretty clear when we talked to them, like, look, we're brand new, you're coming on board, like, this is what you're buying into, but it just looks a lot different today. And so, we do have very specific rules and regulations and marketing and the processes for everything. Now the challenge is with humans, any human, and when you have 40 different people that are running your operations in different states, you have 40 different ideas and 40 different ways of doing things, and everybody does things a little bit differently. And so there is some autonomy in terms of how people can market and do sales, because everybody's different. You can't put everybody into one box. But our job is really to support, continue to evolve, and provide as much material that we can and training to our different locations to help make them be successful.
Yeah. And whether it's running a business or running a marketing program, or I often look at that parallel just between running a business and doing marketing is getting really first, just understanding your audience, whether it's your franchisees or your customers or partners. So it's really understanding them, but also that continuous two-way communication and feedback, and getting feedback from them, taking the feedback and, making adjustments, again, whether it's marketing or, running kind of like a business. I mean, you just said a second ago, the changes that you guys put into place over the years, from franchise 1 to whatever number you're at today, a lot has probably changed. What was some of the feedback that you got from them that you guys took and said, hey, that is great feedback. We're going to go and think about how do we sort of build this in a way that kind of addresses the feedback or kind of works for everybody? I mean, do you remember really critical sort of communication that came from franchise?
It wasn't like a critical piece of feedback. I think it was just constant, and I say that is back in 2021, we thought that the best way to connect with realtors was phone calls. You got a cold call.
Yeah.
And that was something that, we really said, you got to make calls every day. You got to call them. And to an extent you do, but things like this evolve, when you put it in the hands of different individuals and see them run it a little bit differently. And, today we really realize that it's a face-to-face business. All that other stuff is ancillary, and you've got to just be in front of these people. And that's really what we harp. And so, the evolution has, there has been an evolution, but evolution is constant for us. I mean, if it's not, we're constantly trying to figure out how to make them better and, get them more opportunities, and how can we support them doing that?
Yeah.
And so, that could be around training sessions, that can be around bringing in professionals that are not with Renovation Sells that can help with some of that teaching and coaching, and, creating new marketing, and us at corporate thinking of new technology solutions that we can use, and, lead generation tools is where that's been. So I don't think there's been like a moment that was like, oh my God, this is profound. I just think that it's been a constant evolution and change of, you test, and then you evaluate, and then you make new decisions, and you maneuver.
Yeah.
And that's more what it is. But again, I think that's any business. It's as it grows and it learns, just like we talked about raising a child, it changes and evolves.
Yeah.
And that's what businesses do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I think if you look at any business, no matter how big or small, I mean, even my, consulting business that I have in marketing and branding, it might look totally different a year from now. And somebody will say, well, what was did you have that big aha moment of how you changed? No, it's 100 different things that were small that kind of led me here. And when I look back, it's even hard to understand what that process looked like. How many franchises are you guys at today?
We're at 38 franchises.
Okay.
That's right.
And of the 38 and however many new incoming that you guys have, how much I'm just more curious than anything. How much like interaction do you guys have between the franchises of like them sort of saying, hey, like over here in my, part of the country, this is what works really well. And that might be something that another franchise didn't think about, that maybe even you guys didn't think about. Like how much of that sort of cross-pollination happens?
Well, it's a constant. I mean, and look, I have a team now, and there's, 8 or 9 of us total that work on the franchise business. And, we have marketing, we have operations, we have training and different areas in design. And so there's different buckets now. And so the interactions happen obviously in different buckets that not one person is involved in. Our job is to support, listen, and adapt to what our system wants. And our job as the franchisors is really to advance the brand. How do we advance the brand? And, with the major focus being is how do we make our franchisees successful? And so, someone from my team is constantly communicating in some capacity with our franchisees, whatever it may be. If it's, something in the field about design and construction, if it's something about marketing and how do we go about it and where's the collateral and there's a variety of topics obviously that we can support on.
Mm-hmm.
Some franchisees are more engaging than others. Some people are more self-sufficient than others, and that's just human nature in general.
Yeah.
And right, but we always have that open door policy of we're always available. Someone will always help you. I have a team big enough to help everybody. And so, we're trying to constantly have those interactions. We do listen and hear what's going on, and different parts of the country have different challenges. They're different real estate markets. And so taking that information, to your point, listening to what's working, what's not, and then, making decisions on how to properly, develop resources
mm-hmm.
and develop new products for them is what we do at the corporate level. But again, it's a constant evolution, and it's not, one thing and, oh my God, we're talking to, 38 every day.
Yeah.
It's a constant communication in some form of another from us to them and them to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't really talk about this much yet. The really, I feel like you guys have a really well-defined process where you can, come in and move quickly and, get, sort of the critical updates done in a home that's going to help it sell quickly and sell based on, what a home buyer is looking for. And a lot of that is because you guys have been doing it for a while and you kind of know what those things are. The design aspect of all of it is that I think I read somewhere that you have a design team that is part of like the core business, and then they work with all of the franchise. Is that right?
That's
or
right.
Is that, yeah?
That's right. Yeah. We've developed a pretty neat design process where we can get and do remote design within 7 business days of pretty much any project. And so, that's part of one of the biggest value adds of Renovation Sells as a franchise system is that we have the design piece, and I have full-time designers that all day long, give design and product information to our franchisees so they can then execute that design.
Yeah.
And so it is a big piece of what we do.
Yeah. And I didn't want to skip over that because I think I'm guessing if, another company just tried to recreate what you guys do, I mean, having the ability to do kind of the right design that's going to help it, sell quickly. That's not, that's just, the right sweet spot, and doing it quickly and doing it at a really good price and having the process to like do all that really quickly. I imagine that's not something that's easy to just like snap your fingers and say, hey, we can do that too, because you guys have that experience. And that's obviously a core part of it too, is like getting it done quickly and helping it sell. Like that's a big part of it, I imagine.
That's right. I mean, the design is a big part of it. I think something that makes us unique and different is that every project from our standpoint is uniquely designed. And so we feel as a company that, houses deserve different levels depending on the level that they, who that buyer is. And so what I mean by that is a $500,000 house doesn't always deserve, the same level of finishes that $1 million house does, and $1 million house doesn't deserve the same level of finishes that a $2 million house does. And so taking that into consideration, designs change too. That's the other thing. I mean, there's a timeless look, but then there's, people want different things. White cabinetry isn't all the rage anymore. It's shifting. And so following those design trends to give the buyers what they want and what they see and what they demand is something that's unique to us, because we're doing, hundreds of unique designs every year.
Yeah.
All over. And frankly, different parts of the country demand a different level. Miami is designed different than Denver, and Denver's designed different than, Texas. And so taking that into consideration is also a part of our whole process, which I think makes us very unique, but it allows us to, keep up with the trends, and the real estate partners that we work with really like what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm probably at least a year behind all the trends. I'm just now hearing everyone make fun of the millennial gray and white. And
that's okay. The general public's not supposed to be up on the trends, and we're not trying to always do the top trends, because some of that top trend is almost too trendy, right? And too specific, but we do want to follow and look, this is above my pay grade now, right? This is what the designers do, but follow those trends and put into place those different types of design that is designed forward, looks nice, and looks what people are seeing on Instagram and on HGTV. That's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I know you got to run here in a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about just what are you most excited about when it comes to the business? What trends are happening in the industry? Even just the things that you guys are talking about day in, day out about kind of how to grow the business. What are you most excited about? Where do you want to take things?
Yeah, listen, the most exciting thing that we're utilizing and looking at is AI, but that's everybody these days, right? Yeah. Like, how do you integrate AI from design? How can you upload pictures from your existing place, and then you can get it to look like something that our design team has done, and technology that's surrounding, some infield instant bidding where you can scan spaces and get estimates in real time. Those are things that are really exciting that weren't available 2 years ago. But with the advancement of AI and the technology on the cameras on their phone, those are things that are really, really good. And so that's what I'm most excited about. And, in the secondary aspect of this is creating and forming new partnerships on a national level, because our process it works, and there's a need for it. And so constantly pushing that ball forward, but those things all take time. Technology and partnerships take time to do, but those are things that are always super exciting about what the future holds for us.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll let you run here in a minute. I have one last question, and we've been talking about work stuff, obviously, the whole time, the business, entrepreneurial stuff. When you're not working, when you're not, grinding away, running the business, what do you do for fun? What do you do to relax, unwind?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm pretty active. Sorry, my dishwasher's going off here in the background if you hear it. I'm pretty active, and so I'm high energy, so I'm constantly in motion in some capacity. And so if it's, taking a workout class, I play pickleball, anything that's competitive from a sporting nature, I like to play. And so, being active and out and about is something that, that I do a lot. I think the other thing, I always like to mention this because it's probably something that not everybody thinks about, but as people that are running businesses, it can be a grind. And I'm a very big proponent of mental health. And so, I meditate daily to really calm and keep centered. And so, I always kind of say that to take down the veil a little bit, because I feel like it's still even stigmatized with, being mentally healthy and having that attitude.
Yeah.
But the meditation aspect for me has probably been the single greatest stress reliever. And I've been doing it now for close to 7 years.
Yeah.
But it's been the probably biggest stress reliever. I can operate in times of high stress because I'm able to calm my mind. And so the exercise and with some of the meditation is something that I do a lot. And obviously, and then it's something that I do. So I think that's a big portion that people should think about. Healthy mind, healthy body,
Right.
equals good execution.
Yep. And you've been in Chicago enough years. I feel like I can ask this. Do you have a Chicago team that you root for, or do you have some hometown teams?
I root for the Cubs and I root for the Bears. I don't really follow pro basketball and hockey that much. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and so, I am a Commanders fan to an extent, and I'll pull for the Orioles, but I've been gone for so long, and that it's hard if anybody, that's out of state, or sometimes it's hard to follow out of market sports.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to be a Cubs fan and fun to be a Bears fan, and sometimes, not all the time.
Yeah.
But I pull for most of Chicago's teams, and I'll pull for my hometown teams too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of mental health, I think for your mental health, it's not a great time to be a Chicago sports fan. I almost pick whatever team. It's rough. So. All right. Well, I know you got to run. I appreciate the time. It was great chatting. Let's definitely stay in touch.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, Dan.
All right. Appreciate it, Mike.
Bye.
Bye-bye.